What's up everyone, I'm Rhett Shull. Welcome back to the Pedalboard build series. This is episode 2, and today we're talking about soldered patch cables versus solderless patch cables. We're going to talk about the differences between each type of cable, help you decide which you should go with on your board build, and I'm going to show you how to solder your own patch cables. So first, let's start with the basics. If you are brand new to pedals and pedalboard building, you might not know what a patch cable is or what it does. So essentially, a patch cable is just a short cable, an instrument cable that is meant to connect two effect pedals together. It's meant to patch them together. Now, patch cables for pedal boards come in all different shapes and sizes and configurations. So if you're just starting out, it can be confusing to try and pick what you need, what type of cable or connector. Should I go soldered or solderless? So we're going to talk briefly about the different types and what you should go with for your pedal board. So the first thing to look at is what type of connectors or plugs are you going to want to use for your patch cables. So the first type are these right-angled soldered plugs. These are really common, they're cheap, they're easy to put together, and they're reliable. But one downside is these can be a little more bulky than some of the other options out there. So if you're building a really big, complicated pedal board with a lot of pedals and you want them to fit closely together, these might not be a great idea. But for 90% of the applications out there, this is what I would recommend you go with. Another common type of connector is the pancake plug or the pancake jack. Now these are made by a company called Switchcraft. They are the 226 plugs, and I used to run these exclusively on my board. These are also soldered connectors, but the downside to these, and the reason I'm not running them on this board, is they're much wider than the right angle plugs. So if you are going to be running stereo out of a delay pedal or reverb, it's a lot harder to get these two to fit next to each other closely. In fact, on pedals like the Eventide H9, you can't use these plugs next to each other in a stereo configuration because they're just too wide. And then the third connector we're going to look at today is this solderless low profile plug. Now there's a lot of different solderless connectors out there made by different companies, but these low profile ones have become really popular over the last couple of years because they kind of combine the best of both worlds. You get the slim profile of the pancake connector. You can tell here they're not much wider than the pancake plugs, but they also fit next to each other really well like the right angle plugs. And because of that, these are a really popular option for a lot of guitar players out there. Now, the next thing to talk about is honestly a point of contention for a lot of guitar players, and that is the soldered versus solderless debate. Now, what does that mean? Well, traditionally, patch cables, like most instrument cables and XLR cables, are soldered together, meaning the actual connections inside this plug are soldered like most electronics out there today. Now, what this does is gives you a really reliable, long-lasting connection that's going to stand up to the abuses of traveling on the road, on airplanes, on buses, or if you're swapping pedals in and out on your board a lot. Unplugging and plugging these jacks back in causes wear and tear on these connectors. And a plug like this has built-in strain relief as well. So even though I'm pulling on this cable here, it's not moving the actual soldered connection inside the plug. But some people just aren't interested in soldering or buying the equipment or learning how to do it. And so for them, there is the solderless plug. Now, these connections are made completely mechanically, meaning there's no solder inside this connector to hold it together. And because of that, solderless plug manufacturers have to come up with unique ways of actually holding the cable inside the connector so that it doesn't come loose and break your signal chain. Now, there's plenty of different manufacturers out there that do this in different ways. These are from Crosby Audio. You literally just shove the cable into the end of the plug, fold it at a 90-degree angle, put this end cap on, and screw it together. So it's quick, it's easy, but solderless cables are not as reliable as soldered cables. I'm sorry, they just aren't. Now, I'm sure there's going to be keyboard warriors down in the comments section telling me how wrong I am, but trust me, these are not quite as reliable as soldered plugs. Now, does that mean that these are horrible and you should never use them? No. In fact, I used these on one of my boards. But the reason I chose to go solderless on that board is because that board is basically set up. I'm not swapping those pedals in and out. They're staying exactly where they are. So there's not a lot of movement and wear and tear on these cables. I also don't travel a lot with that pedal board. It stays here at the house. It occasionally goes on a fly date with me or out to a local gig, but it's not my main board. So which one is right for you? Well, if you're the type of player that's traveling a lot, or you're swapping pedals in and out of your board a lot, or you need a super reliable gig-ready pedal board, soldered cables are the way to go for you. They're gonna last longer and be more reliable, which is honestly the most important thing when it comes to a gigging pedal board. Now, if you're the type of player that's playing primarily at, there's the plosives again. Now, if you're the type of guitarist who's playing mostly at home and you're not moving your pedals in and out a lot, I think solderless cables are a good option for you. But just know that there is a higher chance of the solderless cable going down compared to a soldered cable, because you're only relying on a mechanical connection inside this plug and not a soldered connection. All right, let's talk about the tools and supplies you're gonna need to make your own patch cables. First up, soldering iron. Now, there's plenty of options out there. If you're on a budget, you can spend 15, 20 bucks to get just a single soldering iron with a few replacement tips. Or if you're going to be doing a lot of soldering and making cables, I would actually recommend going with something like this, a digitally controlled soldering station. And if you're going to be making patch cables, a cable tester is essential. I've done plenty of cable builds without a cable tester, and it's really, really frustrating to get to the end of the build where your board is finally put together. You go to plug your guitar in, plug it into the amp, you hit a chord, and nothing happens. Then you get to go on the fun hunt of trying to find the bad cable. You can prevent that by testing your cables before you even plug them into your pedals. Next up is good solder. This is something that I learned about recently from my friend Mason Marangella over at Vertex when we built my main pedal board about a year ago. If you haven't seen that video, check it out here. But Mason was telling me the importance of using really good, high quality leaded solder in your patch cables. The better quality solder you have, the more reliable connection you're gonna have and the longer that cable is gonna last. So for this project, I went with KESTER leaded solder. This is the KESTER 6040. This will be linked in the description box down below. And finally, the connectors. I'm gonna be using these right angle plugs that I picked up on Amazon. These are great. Again, Mason and I used these on my main pedal board build. These are reliable, they're simple to put together, and I like them because they have this little clamp here on the end that once the cable is soldered, you actually clamp that down with a pair of pliers to provide strain relief on the actual solder joint, which is really important to prolonging the life of your patch cables. All right, so while the iron is warming up, I'm gonna go ahead and unwrap my cable. I'm using Mogami 2319. I love this cable for pedal boards because it's flexible, it's easy to move around and get in the right place. So I'm going to trim it to length. You can use just a simple razor blade to do this. I'm using the special little tool from Planet Waves, but it's just simply a razor blade. Once it's cut to length, I'm gonna go ahead and prep my first plug. I'm just gonna pull the end off and use a pair of needle nose pliers to open up the strain relief in the back so I can slide the cable into position. Next, I'm gonna see how much of the cable jacket I need to actually strip back. And I'm using a special cable stripping tool here that I got with a solderless cable kit a few years ago. You can find these on Amazon for next to nothing. Once you've got the outer jacket of the cabling stripped to length, you want to take the ground winding and twist it together with your first finger and your thumb. This is going to make it a lot easier to solder and get a good connection. Once that's done, you want to peel away this black stuff that's on the inner dielectric coating that shields the inner core of the wire. This black coating is actually conductive and it can cause your cable to short out if you don't remove it. So just use your thumbnail and peel it off before you strip back the inner conductor. Once that's done, you want to lay your cable inside the plug to make sure everything is the right length. If it's a little too long, you can use these flush cut snips to shorten the cable up because you actually don't need that much cable sticking out. Next up is one of the most important things in the entire soldering process, and it's pre-tinning all of your connections. So I start by pre-tinning my iron to make sure it's conducting heat well, and then I'm going to pre-tin both the inner conductor and the outer ground wire on my cable. When everything is pre-tinned, it makes the soldering process really easy and quick. Once the cable's done, I'm going to pre-tin my plug. This lower portion is where the ground wire is going to go, and this center plug is where my center conductor is going to go. Then it's just a matter of getting both surfaces hot enough to melt the solder. Once that's done, you've made a good connection and you can move on. However, sometimes you will need to add a little extra solder just to make sure you've got a good connection. Once that's done, I use these pliers to clamp down the strain relief on the plug to relieve any stress that might happen on the actual solder joint, and then you just take the end of the plug and screw it into place. Now, one important thing to not forget is before you solder together the other side, you want to slide the other jacket on, because if you forget to do that, you're going to have to completely unsolder the connection to slide that outer jacket through the cable. Ask me how I know. Then it's just a simple rinse and repeat. You do this over and over again until you have enough patch cables put together to finish your pedal board. And you'll notice the more cables you put together, the faster it goes and the better the end product is. Now the last thing we want to do before it goes on the board is actually test it. So I'm just simply plugging it in here and I've got all the lights lit up telling me that I've made a good patch cable. Now, it is worth noting that on this pedal board build, I'm actually doing this step out of order. Usually what you want to do is have your pedal board laid out with your pedals in order where they're going to live on the board before you start to make your own custom length patch cables. But for me, this board is not going to be the same setup consistently. I'm going to always be swapping pedals in and out as I get new pedals to try out and demo, as I buy and sell stuff. So because of that, I'm just going to be making a few stock length patch cables that I know will work no matter what pedals I'm using. But just know that if you're following along with this pedal board build, you want to get your pedal layout done first before you worry about your patch cables. So there you go. That's the differences between soldered and solderless patch cables and how to build your own soldered patch cables to custom length. What do you like to use? Let me know in the comments section down below. Now, everything I use to build these patch cables is all linked in the description box down below. So if you're following along at home, you can check those links out. They are affiliate links. So if you buy through those links, I get a small commission, which really helps me out in making these videos. If you want to support the channel directly, you can check out the green room, which is linked below. You can sign up for one-on-one Skype sessions with me each month, get access to things like my Strymon presets, extra Kemper profiles that I'm doing, and download my original music. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Rhett Shull. I'm posting there all the time, going live, doing all that fun stuff. So that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Be on the lookout for the next video in this pedalboard series very soon. I'm Rhett Shull. Thanks for watching.